Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Football Outsiders Draft live stream here on Tuesday, April 12th, 2022. I'm Mike Tanier. With me, as always, is my co-host, Derrik Klassen. How you doing, Derrik?
I'm doing great. Kind of excited for the show. Probably our oddest, structure that we've had so far. So I'm kind of excited to dig into it.
I promise you it won't be that weird. It's going to be really weird. Question for you before we begin, though. Do you remember when the draft was on May 8th, 9th, and 10th?
Yes, it was like, 4 years ago, maybe something like that. And it was just, why?
What? It was 2014.
Okay. Oh, wow. Even longer ago. Jesus.
Yes. It was the Jadeveon Clowney, Johnny Manziel, Blake Bortles, Khalil Mack draft.
What a hell of a class to extend the conversation on, by the way, with Manziel. Jesus.
And so talk about extending a conversation that's going to go on too long. It was the Michael Sam draft.
Oh, wow. Oh, I totally forgot he was that year too.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Lots of very informed and inspired debate that year. What was your pre-draft run-up like that particular year?
Well, so that would have been my junior year of high school. So I'm sure I was still trying to gear up for AP tests and stuff like that.
Okay.
I remember liking Teddy Bridgewater a lot. Which, if not for injury, I think still would have worked out. But
in the industry, it was torturous. Because you probably feel it right now. This season has gotten a little too long, this draft season.
The past 2 weeks, and then I guess the following 2 weeks from here on out, I'm ready for it to be over. It's always fun. Draft season's great, but I think we're getting towards the end here.
Yeah, and that's it. And at least this year, everything was a week later. The combine was a week later, et cetera. So that kind of shrunk this time. Back then, it was like an extra 3 weeks of talking about Johnny Manziel over and over and over again. And this is like lion season. I think Eric DeCosta of the Ravens just calls it lion season. And that's where we're at right now. Like, all the news is gone. Everyone's had their pro day except Drake London.
He may never have his pro day.
It'll be in the second round. It'll be on the Friday of the draft.
He'll do it after he gets picked.
And all we're getting right now is, the visit news and the smokescreen news. And the GMs go up and they give us these little hints and we have to play these games. I'm going to share a tweet with you. My good friend Matt Lombardo of Fansided, who is a Giants beat writer, just announced 31 minutes ago that the Giants are hosting some of the top prospects for their top 30 visit: edge Kayvon Thibodeaux, cornerback Sauce Gardner, and offensive tackle Evan Neal. What does that tell you?
I mean, it just tells me that they're hoping one of them falls.
It tells me they have a high first-round pick and they want a good football player.
Yeah, right. They have 2 high first-round picks.
They have 2 high first-round picks, and they want a good football player. And this time of year, by the way, I want to do the ad read before I forget, because everything we do here at Football Outsiders, draft-related, is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. And you can use the promo code FO40, that's FO40, the digits, at Underdog to double your deposit up to $100. Links to Underdog Fantasy can be found in the description of this video below. And go play with us on Underdog today. We're getting to that time of year, folks. You can play baseball and NBA there at Underdog. I believe they have some draft stuff there. Well, you can do some draft props. So visit us on Underdog Fantasy. But this being lion season and this being visit season, it's also, I thought, conspiracy theory season. Since everybody's making stuff up right now, I have some things, like some pet theories, some pet peeves that I wanted to run past you today, Derrik, because I feel like maybe I'm losing my mind a little bit, but like I'm suspicious of some of the information I'm hearing.
I mean, it's April 12th. I think we're all losing our minds at least a little bit.
Okay. Well, since I get ready for my conspiracy theories here.
Oh, you came fully prepared.
Okay. This way I can keep out all of the smoke screens. And all of the noise can be filtered through, and all that can get to me right now is pure, unadulterated truth for these NFL draft conspiracy theories. I'm going to take this off now because I don't think our sponsor wants to be affiliated with this. So, bang. Conspiracy theory number 1 that I want to run past you. Kenny Pickett's scouting report is nothing but autofill. And what I mean by that is, we saw Kenny Pickett, 5th-year starter, broke out his final season. He's the safe pick. He's the NFL-ready quarterback. We all kind of stuck that in the scouting report and some of us, like even if we watch the film, and of course we watch the film, we had that in our mind's eye that that's who this guy is. Doesn't seem to line up with some of the things you've been saying in Film Room lately.
Yeah, not at all to me. Because yeah, like you said, 5-year player, 4-year starter. He's going to be like 24 years old this rookie year. So you would think that this is some guy who always has his wits about him, always knows where to go with the ball, very calm in the pocket, all that sort of jazz. I mean, even before I got to him, I was hearing, some like he's Joe Burrow-ish type comps. And then you watch him, and it's like Burrow was maybe the best processor I've ever seen at the position coming out of college. And Pickett is like kind of all over the place. He still looks like he's a sophomore a lot of the time to me. And I think when you're, a 4-year starter, 24-year-old guy, that's pretty concerning. So I think, yeah, to your point, he's very much a guy who it just seems like, oh, he's an older prospect with experience, so he must be the most pro ready. But you turn on the tape and that just doesn't really seem to be true to me.
And that information bubbled up. Like, I mean, starting in the Senior Bowl, it's like the insiders love this guy. He's so prepared. He crushes it all along the way in the process. And well, that says maybe that like you're great at doing the firm handshake and going up to the whiteboard and jotting something together. You talk about processing. Some of the things you showed, it seems like he's late a lot of the time. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yep, I think he's late a lot of the time. And to me, the biggest thing is just there's not really consistency in the way that he processes. With like Ritter, for example, it seems very clear to me like where he wins, and like if you call a certain concept, I know where the ball is going to go. Or even with Malik Willis, for example, I know exactly what his strengths and weaknesses are as a processor.
Right.
And he might have a decent amount of flaws, but I feel like I know exactly what they are, so it's easier to address them. With Pickett, it just feels incredibly random when he has this moments of just not wanting to trigger or not being able to get backside, just all this stuff. So the fact that his process feels so random, it's almost hard to like pin down how you're supposed to fix him. You know what I mean?
Right. And you when you watch them kind of longitudinally. So you're not like, oh, I watched the 2021 and I watched the 2019. You're kind of watching sort of week by week by week to see this development, but you're not necessarily seeing that with Pickett.
Right. I try to watch as chronologically as I can, especially when I do my charting. It just feels easier that way. And also kind of like you're mentioning, you get a sense of like progression over the course of the year. With Pickett, it just didn't feel like that was that way. I mean, there would be one game where he's sprinting to a check down every play, and then the next game he just never hits one ever. And the consistency is his process. Like I said, it just wasn't there for me, and I couldn't understand it.
So what happens if the Panthers or Falcons grab him and say, the job is yours, the job is yours as soon as Mariota gets hurt or something like that?
I think bad things would happen. Like to me, Nate Tice has made the comparison to Taylor Heineke, which I think is actually pretty apt. The problem is Taylor Heineke, I think, was a UDFA who took like 6 years to be Taylor Heineke. You know what I mean? And he's turned into a decent, top 32-ish starter. I mean, because there has to be 32. But like it took a long time for him to be that. And it would, to me, take a while for Pickett to get kind of his bearings under him in the NFL. So if he's a guy who you're taking top 10, you would typically assume he needs to play early. I don't think that would go very well if Pickett has to play early.
Right. Yeah, Heineke, and by the time Pickett like advances to Heineke, he's 29 or something like that.
And on his like 5th-year option. Because you would be taking it with this first-round pick and all that jazz. Exactly.
Right. Okay. Well, that kind of satisfies my feeling that like that scouting report, okay, it's not really autofill, but like a lot of times we see what we want to see in these prospects. I want to see a safe, low floor, a high floor, low ceiling guy. That's what we're seeing in Pickett. Number 2. Now, this one really boggles my mind. Travon Walker, who is now plus 300 to be the first pick in the NFL draft. Okay. The NFL is just doing this to troll Trent Baalke. The rest of the NFL guys, they know Walker's a good player. I'm not going to say Walker's a bad player, but they're like, who's picking first? Trent Baalke. Is he an impressionable soul? He really is. If he gets an idea in his head, he might run with it and run until he runs off of a cliff. Let's see if we can get him to take like the 3rd best guy on the Georgia defensive line first overall, so we can get Hutchinson and Thibodeaux and anybody else we want to fall to him. And that's my theory about why Travon Walker has risen from mid to late first-round pick, which seems reasonable, up to number 1. Derrik, how crazy am I?
I think there's probably some truth to it. I don't know if it's like I don't know. Baalke just seems very much like the kind of GM who, if you just jangle some shiny keys in front of him, he's gonna like get really excited. And Travon Walker's that kind of prospect because athletically, he's one of the most insane things we've ever seen. I mean, he has a ridiculous wingspan. He's like 272 and he moves like he's 230.
Right.
He's played all over the defensive line. He can do all these other sort of assignments. He's this like incredible ball of potential. And if anybody is going to pass up on prospects who are theoretically safer to me, like, Hutchinson, Thibodeaux, Evan Neal, whatever, it's going to be Baalke. And it seems like there's probably at least some degree of trying to push him up the board so that Baalke panics and does it. I don't know if it'll happen, but I think he's not given himself there's some reasonable doubt that he could do something stupid like this.
Right. And of course, I'm being a little silly with these things.
Mm-hmm.
GMs love Walker.
Oh, it seems like it, yeah. I mean, again, he's one of the most athletic, specimens I think we've seen, and especially in this class.
Right. And we've seen athletic specimens. Here's the thing I have. Like, athletic edge rusher, tons and tons of potential. Look at these measurables. Look at the 3-cone, et cetera. We've seen them. They always go late in the first round. That's where that guy habitually goes if he doesn't have super tape.
Yeah, like the Penn State guy last year that went to Baltimore. Like, that's a perfect example. Right. Incredible athlete, didn't really know how to play the position all the way yet. And he went late first to a good org that could figure it out. That's a little different than going first overall to an org who has typically not figured these kinds of players out.
Now, I want to throw a couple of numbers at you real quick, by the way, to get a sense of this. I was looking at the pressure rate statistics. Sports Inflow Solutions keeps track of the total number of pressures that edge rushers make. And, of course, you can divide that by the number of times they rush the pass. You can get pressure rate. Kayvon Thibodeaux, Oregon, 20% pressure rate, 20% of snaps. That's very, very, very good. One of the best in the league. Will Anderson of Alabama blows every statistic away.
Oh, year. I mean, that guy's different. That guy's different.
Next year's show for him. Mekhi Standers is at 20%. Aiden Hutchinson's at 18.1%. That's obviously very solid. Karlaftis was at 16.7. You're hearing these numbers, 16, 16, 16. Travon Walker was at 9.5% pressure rate. 9.5% pressure rate was 7th on Georgia.
I mean, that sounds insane, but having watched that Georgia front enough,
right,
it kind of matches what's going on there. I mean, truthfully, it's why they don't really give Walker, like, part of the reason, like, it has this weird, like, double-edged sword to it, where, like, part of the reason he probably doesn't have as many pressures is because they don't give him a ton of one-on-one situations, but also, like, if he was good enough for them, they would be giving him them. So, I mean, it kind of is like one of those, it's like a Rorschach test. It's whatever you want it to be. And personally, I lean towards the side of he's not good enough at it, so they didn't give him those chances.
And I'm kind of somewhere in between on that. And it all boils down to, talk to me in the middle of the first round, at the end of the first round. Because you're right. The other question is, well, he can't get the sacks because Wyatt and Davis and Dean is blitzing, and they have that young man whose name eludes me, number 88, who's always
Jalen Carter, another potential number one guy.
We'll see him next year, etc. But it's like, if you're a number one guy, you should be the winner on your own team for these things. And people might say, well, there's not enough sacks to go around there in Georgia. Well, David Ajabo's sack rate for Michigan was 14.9%, as the other guy, the Hutchinson. So, I can't get around this very low pressure rate. I don't see the film, and therefore, and I don't see the stats, but I do see the potential of the player. So first round, maybe we're not just trolling Trent Baalke, but I'm not crazy to think the Walker bus has gone a little ahead of itself.
No, I think so. Because that's the thing, when like 3 months ago I first started grading him, he was like a late first round pick to me, and I thought I liked him. And then it turns out, I guess he's just a top 3 player in the class all of a sudden.
You didn't like him enough.
I guess.
That's what I think. Like, everyone discovered him simultaneously, and they kept out discovering each other until he's the best player in the draft. Look what a discovery I made. It's like when you see the band on the side stage, they're the next Beatles.
Exactly.
Right. Next conspiracy theory, and I think I saw you tweeting with some folks about this yesterday. Not specifically the conspiracy, but the player. Oregon's Kayvon Thibodeaux, just a victim of the Oregon haters. What piece of news did you see coming across, or piece of gossip did you see coming across Twitter yesterday?
I want to say it was a clip from Daniel Jeremiah's
Yes.
podcast. I don't know if he was saying it or if somebody else was saying it on his podcast, but it was the idea that if Hutchinson goes number 1 overall, which is pretty likely,
Yeah.
that the Lions would actually be interested in Kayvon Thibodeaux at number 2, which is in stark contrast to, the past 2 months, we've seen Thibodeaux fall down to 8 or 10 and end up behind even guys like Jermaine Johnson or whatever.
Yes.
So I thought it was just funny to me that, to me, he's been the best player in the draft the entire time. And it was just insane to me that he was falling to the 10 range. And now that we're finally almost to the draft and he's back at the top the way that he always belonged.
We've come full circle.
Yeah, we've come full circle.
This is why I keep my tinfoil hat handy this time of year, because for weeks I was like, what's wrong with me? Because, by the way, the whispers about the character, they sometimes get to us. Like you're in Indianapolis, you're sitting around, some scout, some assistant GM's friend, etc., comes up and says, yeah, blah, blah, blah. The agent for the other guy comes up and tells you this. I never heard a whisper that made sense about Thibodeaux. I don't know if you have.
No, because this has always been my take on it, is that everything I've either heard in public or off the record or whatever is like not substantiated by anything. It's
Right.
just like, oh, teams just don't like him. And it's like, well, what does that mean?
Right.
Like, that doesn't mean anything.
Right.
And so to me, it just seems very much of, kind of the Oregon thing. It seems like for whatever reason, guys just don't like the attitude that these Oregon guys have. I don't think there's anything to that. Obviously, I think Sewell and Herbert, who are the two other big ones, obviously, have both been incredible and seem like very good professionals. So I don't think there's anything to whatever this Oregon thing is. I think it's just nonsense.
Right, because I'm not losing my mind. Sewell had some of that. He's soft. He's not aggressive. He had some of that, right?
It seemed like it, yeah. And then Herbert was kind of he's too soft-spoken to be a leader, blah, blah, blah. And then he just comes out and everybody loves him and he's a cyborg.
Right. And this is my theory that, like, all of these SEC heads, these 3-year lettermen on Twitter, like guys who's just like all of football must come out of either Texas or Alabama and must be a certain way. They look at those shiny uniforms. They remember Chip Kelly when he was there, and they're like, this program, and they are just predisposed to think a certain way about the style of football they're playing in the Pacific Northwest. They're a bunch of dirty hippies. I don't know. I don't know what they think about it, but it's like every single time an Oregon top prospect comes out, I feel like it happened to DeForest Buckner. I don't remember.
It seemed like, yeah.
Yeah, it goes back that far. They just have it out for this individual.
Even like Eric Armstead, I felt like fell further than he was supposed to, just kind of on the basis of like, oh, he played basketball for a while. Maybe he's not all that interested in football, blah, blah, blah. And then he's like almost an all-pro defensive lineman. Like, come on, like, it's just absurd.
Right.
And the thing is, to me, with Thibodeaux is like, if you just took off his current school and said, yeah, there's this former number 1 overall recruit who started for 3 years, had pretty good production at a Power 5, has like fairly good tape. Yes. Like, you would think that's like an automatic top 3 pick every time. Right. And so the fact that he wasn't that for a little bit, these past couple of months was just bonkers to me. It just made no sense.
So you're confirming me. Yeah. There's an Oregon haters bias, right?
I don't know if it's Oregon or the West Coast in general, and they just happen to be the best West Coast school, but yeah.
Excellent. Confirmation, just what I need when I'm wearing my tinfoil hat. Let's go on to another conspiracy theory. And this goes to somebody who had their pro day last week and has a chance to talk a little bit about somebody we haven't talked about a lot, but is a top prospect, Derrik Stingley Jr. And my theory is that every team hopes someone else drafts Derrik Stingley. We did see him at his pro day. He was phenomenal at his pro day. He was phenomenal for the national championship, LSU Bayou Bengals in 2019. And in between, What are your thoughts on Stingley, and what's your perception of how the league thinks of him right now?
So I think the conspiracy theory here might not be wrong, that every team kind of does want him to be that guy that goes in the top 10 so that somebody else falls.
Right.
I just think that that's really stupid. I think Stingley is a baller.
Okay.
Because to me, so yeah, like the past 2 years, he's had injuries. He's been on and off the field. The program as a whole has not been very good.
Right.
So he's a little bit more living off of like his freshman tape than anything, but again, elite recruit, and he was just dominating people in the SEC level. Like, to me, a couple years ago, he was one of the only guys I've actually seen like go toe to toe with Kyle Pitts. That's really hard, man.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle Pitts is an incredible athlete, incredible route runner for his size. And the fact that Stingley, as a freshman, was able to go toe-to-toe with him, to me, was like, okay, this guy is like a potential all-pro corner. So I think even though his past couple of years have been, weird, especially with all the injury stuff, I just think athletically, he's unbelievable. He has the pedigree of a 3-year starter. His tape, to me, is incredible, when he's on the field.
Yes.
So I just think, like, if he had been any degree of healthier, I think this would be a no-brainer.
Is he your CB1?
Yeah. And that's not even to take away from Sauce. I think Sauce is pretty good too. I just think,
Right.
Stingley he's just incredible.
Right. But my conspiracy theory comes from everyone wants to make a safe choice in the NFL draft.
Yeah. And Stingley with the injury stuff, with him not playing as much the past couple of years, I could see how teams would get a little bit scared of that. Especially when you have another seemingly safer option in a guy like Sauce, who is, he's longer. Right. He has, he played more recently, a lot more film and that sort of stuff, was a part of one of the best G5 defenses ever, which is honestly like a nice little feather in his cap. So,
by the way, I just want to let everyone know, I had my screen set up a certain way. I have been unable to read anything on the side. And I think there's a great conversation going on. I just realized, man, nobody's talking during this. You guys, thank you for all of your contribution. I'm sorry if you asked a question and I did not get to you. I had no idea what was going on. I was trying to read my little script on the side as well. But yeah, sorry about that, folks. Going back to Stingley, it's like, yeah, you know how it is, Derek. It's like, if I'm Joe Sheen, I'm Joe Douglas. I got to make these safe picks. And it's like, oh no, someone jumped ahead of me. Took Stingley. I took Sauce. Well, if Stingley works out, it's like, we got jumped. But we got the other guy, and if it turns out he's an injury case or etc., you get to you get to be like, oh, dodged the bullet. We got the safer choice there.
Right.
Lobby CDQ mentions that Mike Mamula had better college production than Travon Walker. We do not. This is a non-Mike Mamula zone.
I don't even know who that is.
Mike Mamula. Okay, it's no longer a Mike Mamula zone. The Eagles drafted Mike Mamula because he was a workout warrior out of Boston College.
Okay.
Who had this combine results that were just absolutely through the roof at the time. I believe Ray Rhodes was the coach and GM. He was going to be the edge rusher of all edge rushers, except for that guy over there for the Eagles. He came out. He was athletically stiff. He was straight line-ish. And just like he actually had one good game against Willie Roaf. He had like a 3-sack game as well. And then after that, like one of the jokes in Philly is, oh, but he got 3 Harrys. He got 3 Harrys last week and he would never get a sack. And like the other talk here in Philadelphia was, they're going to move him to linebacker next year. And he's going to be a linebacker because, a very stiff edge rusher.
Oh, that makes the perfect linebacker, of course. Yeah.
It's going to make an outstanding linebacker. Yes, he went, thank you, Lobby. He went 7th overall. I don't have all my numbers about him. And eventually he disappeared because he dropped his pants at a bar in front of a woman after a couple of years in the NFL. That's also a thing that happened. Enough about Mike Mamula. I want to just get to a couple of these. Joey Sucks can confirm that all Oregonians are dirty hippies. I knew it. I watched Portlandia, and it's confirmed all of my priors there.
Great show, by the way.
Okay. Patrick Seeley's conspiracy theory is that he gave bad interviews so he wouldn't have to play for a crappy team like the Lions. So I'm assuming you're talking about Thibodeaux.
That it didn't like Deion Sanders. I don't know if Deion Sanders intentionally gave bad interviews, but I think he said something along the lines to teams of like, I'm not going to be there when you're picking anyway. Which I guess is like the opposite of what Thibodeaux was doing, but just like an interesting interview strategy.
Right. Well, Sanders' interview strategy back then was he was so good that nothing else mattered.
Right. And well, I mean, he was right.
Like, I joke about dirty hippies. The NFL guys are so stodgy now. Imagine what they were like in the 1990s. And Deion was as flamboyant as a human being could be. Like they would have any excuse they would have gotten to flush this guy out of the NFL, they would have, and they couldn't because he was so damn good. But I don't think Thibodeaux has that luxury.
Yeah.
I'm going to go into one more conspiracy theory, and that's that the 2022 draft wide receivers aren't really that good. Now, I get this from Lance Zierlein was tweeting about this, I think, last week. And it's just something I wanted to throw out there as something to talk about. I started thinking about it, and it's like there's a lot of very good wide receivers, but is this an outstanding class? What's your overall take on this class?
I think it's like a fairly good class that doesn't have a clear superstar like a Jamar Chase.
Yes.
And even then, like truthfully, I think I probably liked Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith better than anyone in this class. But that's the thing is like that doesn't necessarily take away from this class. I think we were just unbelievably spoiled by the top 10 picks in last year's class between Chase, Smith, and Waddle. And all of them as rookies were as good as we thought they were or better. Like Chase, one of the best rookie receivers
Yes.
we've ever seen. Devonta Smith was incredible for the Eagles.
Yes.
And Jalen Waddle, God bless his soul, getting stuck in Miami. He was incredible last year.
Right.
And so like I think we're just it's hard to live up to the billing of what the 2021 class was, even though there's plenty of talented guys in this class.
And if I think back at the last 3 or 4 drafts, they were loaded with wide receiver talent. And I think we touched on this last week. Somebody asked a question, and it's like they're that good because there's just every draft class has tons and tons of talent. So this one isn't a bad class. It's just that draft classes have tons and tons of talent.
It's not particularly great. It's like the normal kind of good I think we should just expect now. Because yeah, like you said, like this is just kind of the way the sport has evolved where there's just going to be a ton of receiver talent. And this class is like, you know, it lives up to that, but it's not as special as some other classes.
Right. And it might look a little different if Williams and Mekhi to a degree were 100% healthy and we saw them run and things like that. I might be a little bit confident, like, yeah, this is going to be the class. We're probably going to talk about this in 2 weeks or so. How many wide receivers top 10? How many wide receivers first round? What are you seeing on that?
I think one of them probably goes top 10. I would guess like Atlanta, just because their receiver room is one of the worst I've ever seen. It's horrendous. So I could definitely see at least one going in the top 10. Overall first round, I would have to imagine 5, like probably both Ohio State guys,
Right.
London, Williams, and then like one of Burks or maybe Dotson, something like that. I could see somebody taking the swing on Sky Moore even. So
yeah, I could see that. Although I wouldn't. I like Sky Moore, but like in the first round,
yeah, I don't know if I would do it, but we've seen worse receivers get picked in the first round. So
absolutely. Backtrack to Thibodeaux. Thordian Hammer points out his only concern is that the Pac-12 has terrible tackles, and maybe that scares him. The Pac-12 has terrible tackles. That's accurate, right?
Yeah, I mean that's like a fair concern. I just think to me like he's so athletic and to play right away the way that he did and I think he had like 9 sacks as a freshman. Like even if we assume the level of competition is a little bit lower than some of the other power conferences, like I still think he pretty much checks every box.
Right. And I don't think it's bad, but it's not at this level so far.
It's not the CUSA.
Right. It's not Conference USA. It's not the AAC. It's not the Sun Belt. And we've seen edge rushers come out of these places where I've watched the film and like Marcus Davenport years ago, who was a heck of a ball player out of UTSA. And I'd just be watching the film like, what is this nonsense? That dude, that's just a lumpy dude that they stuck at left tackle. And of course he's running past him. You don't get that in the Pac-12.
Right.
Patrick Seeley asked, Jameson Winston going to be a high draft pick or will he drop to the 20s?
I think teams are going to look past the ACL. I really think he is such a special case of speed and like route running for that speed. Because typically when you get these speedsters, like that's kind of all they are. Like Henry Ruggs, that like when he came out of Alabama, that he wasn't a polished player. He was just the fastest guy in the class. So I think teams were willing to swing. I think Williams is that and also a fairly polished route runner. So I think teams, unless the ACL is just turbo terrible bad, I think teams are going to like look past it and just take him.
Yeah, I have a hard time seeing him get past the Eagles in the middle of everything.
Right. That range of like, it's like the Saints, Eagles, Chargers. There's no chance he gets past that. No chance.
Right. The Patriots are in there, etc.
Yeah.
And that leads us, I think, to our next segment here. I'm going to thank you for helping me come back from my conspiracy series. I'm going to put this back around some cold cuts in my refrigerator where it belongs. And it is time now to fix the franchise. And we will get to your question in a moment, Lobby CDQ. This week's Fix the Franchise is a team we talked about last week because they were just coming off of a big trade. It's the New Orleans Saints. Yes, this is one of the weirder teams in the NFL, a team I have strong feelings about. If you recall, they were $50 million in cap debt at the beginning of the offseason. They dug their way out of it by extending some very sensible contracts like Ryan Ramczyk and some not so sensible contracts like Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara. They are a veteran team, which is a nice way of saying an old team, particularly on defense, although they have some youth on the offensive line. And it's hard to say who has what their needs are because they got a guy at a lot of positions. For example, I said needed quarterback. Well, they've got Jameson quarterback, so you might have feelings about that. They left tackle's a need. We're going to stick with that. Wide receiver, they don't have anything besides Michael Thomas, really. And Michael Thomas caught his last touchdown pass in December of 2019. It's been a moment. They lost both free safety Marcus Williams and strong safety Malcolm Jenkins to free agency and retirement. They replaced them with Marcus May and a meme, otherwise known as Daniel Sorensen. And they need youth everywhere, and because they're oldest and they're going to be in ridiculously bad cap shape for years to come, but they're going to be in denial and pretend that they aren't. So one thing I said, Derek, is like when we do these mock drafts, they've got the 2 first-rounders if the Eagles trade. Trade up if you want to, because it seems like everyone seems to think that's what they're doing. You decide to trade up. I decided to trade up. Let's see who you picked for your mock draft. I'm about checking, and here it comes. There's your guy.
Desmond Ridder, always. Yeah, but the thing is, I usually am not inclined to trade up in these drafts because typically it feels like trying to gauge trades in a mock draft is just like a waste of time. However, it just feels like there's no way that the Saints did what they did to not go up again and get a quarterback. Like it would just be really odd to me. And so I took the trade with the Giants, mostly because like I feel like the Giants are probably going to move out of one of those picks, just because I don't think there's a need for them to be good right now. And then I just took, to me, the best quarterback on the board, which is Desmond Ridder. Even for as much as I like him, 7 might be a little rich. But I also think it would not surprise me that they took a quarterback, just because I think when you have Winston, and I believe they have Andy Dalton in the room, for whatever we want to say about what those quarterbacks are now, those are like 2 adult quarterbacks in the room. They're
Yes.
both professionals. They know how to be NFL starting quarterbacks. And I think that's actually a really important thing to have when you're bringing in a young quarterback. You know, I think it's really important to understand like how to be a professional, all that sort of stuff. And I think with this, as smart as Ridder is, I think he would pick up on a lot of that stuff very well. So I actually think it's a really good environment for him to land.
Assuming we're talking about a Sean Payton-esque system moving forward, which makes sense, his assistants are there. Ridder looks like a fit for that. Is that correct?
Right. I think he can do that because they do a lot of like, legitimate drop back stuff where they're giving everything, all 5 are going out. That's why they have Alvin Kamara. And I think he's the kind of guy who can handle all that stuff and get to the right spot consistently. I would like to see him work on his, deep game just a little bit, get better at some of those play action shot plays that they're going to cook up. But other than that, I think, like you said, it would be a pretty good fit.
All right. Now, one of the problems with trading up is you lose your resources, and this is a team with other needs. So they come back around again in the second round, and they try to address left tackle here. Tell me a little bit about Abraham Lucas.
Truthfully, I don't know a ton about Lucas. It was kind of one of those things where they very clearly need a left tackle, replacing Teron Armstead. I think currently their left tackle would be slotted to be James Hurst, who is great when he's your 6th offensive lineman. He's not great when he's scheduled to be your week 1 starter. So I think to me, they have to take the best tackle on the board. And the way it shaked out for me was Abraham Lucas.
Okay. Now, I know good about Romeo Doubs. Anybody who's been watching, trying to figure out the whole Carson Strong thing in Nevada, Doubs and Cole Turner, the tight end, and Carson Strong were like the triplets. They were roommates for all 4 years. And Doubs is kind of a deep threat at wide receiver. That makes sense, right?
Exactly. I mean, truthfully, the Saints could use just about any kind of wide receiver talent past Michael Thomas, but I think the thing they need most is juice. And we even saw that last year. They just don't have a guy who is a consistent downfield threat. Right. Even if they have guys who are like athletic, they just don't function very well down the field and they can't consistently get open. I think Doubs, even though he's kind of limited to being that guy where he's mostly just a deep threat who can occasionally pick the ball out of the air fairly well. I just think that kind of juice is absolutely necessary for them. And he was the best player in that mold with the way the board fell here.
Right. They have like Callaway who you would say, well, that's going to be your defense. Well, he's been on that team for a couple of years now. He's never really
Yeah.
been more than a guy who goes fast in a straight line.
If that was going to work out, it would have already worked out. And I think we're past that.
Right. Now, by the way, there are a couple questions on the board here. I'm going to start with the somewhat facetious one from Joey Sucks. Is burn it to the ground an option to fix the Saints? And now I realize I don't really have to answer that because Patrick Seeley answered it. You can't burn it all down because they extended everyone for 10 years. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think there's something like $30 million over the 2023 cap. Now, that's not real in that the cap's going to change, et cetera, but they've already committed about $270 million. That's real to the 2023 cap. So there's no option for this team to say, let's just cut everyone. They could have tried something like that, like in February. That ship is completely sailed. Another question here, and this is a Bears question. I want to get back to it. Lobby CDQ asks, will the Bears have a chance at Tolbert? I'm assuming you mean Jalen Tolbert.
That would be my guess, yeah.
South Alabama with pick 48. I would guess yes. What do you think, Derek?
I would also guess that he should be on there because I just have to imagine that, like, in that range, in the back end of the first round to the top of the second, I imagine that's where Christian Watson might go, Sky Moore, George Pickens. Like, it feels like there's too many other guys at the in that tier right above him that Tolbert is probably going to be able to fall to 48.
And that's it. I feel like there's a tier. And then Tolbert jumps into this particular group of guys. I think Dobbs is in that group to a degree as well. I think, especially for deep threats, I think Alec Pierce might be a little better than that, but I think Alec Pierce is in that threat, the vertical guys who that's sort of like their dimension, and they're a step below, obviously, the Jameson Williams and guys like that.
Right. I mean, to mention Pierce real quick, I think he would be sick with Justin Fields because I think Fields is very much the type of quarterback who is willing to throw some 50-50 balls. And if there's anything Pierce is good at, it's going up and finding the ball. So
yeah, and that's really, you saw that frequently when you watched Ritter up the sideline of the shot and he gets the arms out. It's what Allen Robinson was always supposed to do, but Allen Robinson's soul got crushed.
Yep. Which, fair.
Yeah, the poor guy had to go from Hackenberg at Penn State to Bortles and those guys, and then you got stuck with Trubisky and all that. So hopefully they'll have a little renaissance now. He's with the Rams now, so maybe things will work out for him. Another question or another insight, back to the Saints for a second. Patrick Seeley thinks the Saints traded for first so they can have two starters on rookie contracts because of all the horrible contracts. I'm about to do my mock, and I had them trading up too. Maybe. I don't think that that's wrong, except that why would you move past the Eagles and up? If all you're doing is going past the Chargers to get Trevor Penning with that pick, with that trade, it still doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
See, that's the thing. It doesn't make sense, but if any team was going to do the thing that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, it probably would be the Saints, right? I still think they're going to end up going up for a quarterback at some point, but like if any team would do this like bizarre thing where they're just trying to get ahead of a couple of teams in the middle of the first round,
right,
it would be the Saints because they're the one team that just bucks every team building trend.
And you're right. And by the way, they will still have two picks instead of one. My thought on the Saints was they would want those two picks in the first round contracts in 2023 when they really have to start jettisoning things. And let's put my mock draft up while we're doing this. And one reason I didn't have them trading up with the Giants is because the Giants cap situation is so ugly that I don't necessarily think the Giants can trade down and have 3 first-round picks. So while they would be down the clown normally, I was like, yeah, I don't see them. They'd be like, nah, we can't afford this. So I went with the Jets. And with your logic, Derek, I agree. Having Jameis and Andy Dalton, you do have 2 adults in the room. You have 2 veterans. That signals to me that they're not necessarily going for a quarterback. And again, that's a conspiracy theory that a lot of people have, that it's not a quarterback that they're going after. So took them up to the Jets and took Charles Cross, very safe, straightforward. Here's your left tackle. You've got your left tackle situation probably solved in Charles Cross. Really not much to talk about, except he's a really solid tackle prospect.
Agree. I mean, and truthfully, he reminds me a lot of Teron Armstead. So I think it's like a pretty seamless fit for them.
Right. And then here's the problem, and this goes back to the dilemma, and it goes back to what Patrick Seeley was saying. They have so many needs that when you trade those 2 resources for one, you open up a potential need elsewhere. If not this year, then next year. And remember, it's not 2 resources you traded for 1. It's 4, 5, because they traded a 3rd-round pick and they traded next year's 1st rounder. And so you're left with the rest of the draft. Like, you could almost go best available athlete for the Saints. So when I was using the mock draft simulator, I prefer Quay Walker was sitting there. Not necessarily a need player, but Demario Davis is one of those guys who's on the wrong side of 30. I think he's getting to be like the wrong side of 32. I don't have it in front of me. He's under contract until the sun burns out and goes supernova. And Walker is the guy you can bring in and give you speed at the linebacker position and give you a useful player right away and a starter in 2023.
Absolutely. I mean, I like Quay Walker a lot. I think some of the, pushing him into the 1st round talk is a little generous. Because I don't think he moves quite as well as he tested side to side. I mean, his long speed is pretty insane. I just mean like his quickness and stuff. But the thing I would say about Walker and why I think he actually would be awesome for the Saints, defense with Dennis Allen is if you watch him at Georgia, they are very adamant about making him their cover player to the field. Like, they want him covering as much space. They're fine with him covering slot receivers, tight ends, all that stuff. They wanted him doing a lot of that.
Right.
If you're going to survive in the Dennis Allen defense as a linebacker, you better be able to cover. And so I think he would be a really cool fit for them.
Right. And keeping that in mind, going from linebacker to safety, you're in need of a box type safety. You currently have Daniel Sorensen, which means you're really in need of a box type safety. And we're all the way down at pick 69. Now, by the way, they don't have pick 69, but since they were only trading up to 10, I gave the Saints something back in the hypothetical imaginary trade I made. I don't know if it works out perfectly. I gave him an extra 3rd-round pick and grabbed Toledo's Tyson Anderson. Now, this is a guy who's really long, 6'2 or 6'3. I believe he ran a 4.36 40 at the combine. He ran something absolutely blisteringly fast at the combine. When you look at him on film, obviously, I love the range. The coverage skills are strong. He quietly had a pretty good Senior Bowl. He was usually covering tight ends. He was able to blanket them pretty well. I don't love the physicality. I'm watching this guy who I think should be up there and hitting and things like that. And he kind of chicken fights with blocks and he kind of gets blocked off. But pure speed, pure coverage, and 3rd round. Here's a guy I could say, he ain't Malcolm Jenkins, but he could be better than Daniel Sorensen.
I think that's the important part. It's just trying to find someone to even push Daniel Sorensen, I think, is really important for them.
Yeah. Pushing is going to, of course, they had Honey Badger visiting last week, and then the Honey Badgers visited the Eagles. And Tyrann Mathieu's agents are making sure we know, and the Chiefs know, how much everyone loves him, because every time he walks in the door of a building, there's a nice picture of that. There's a chance that the Saints have the money. They could sign the Honey Badger. He walked out of the door without a contract in his home state, in his hometown. So I think that replacement is going to have to come through the draft. And then I'll go with the real useful titles question. Really think Breece Hall will fall this far? Probably not. But the mock draft simulator I was using, and I run it a couple of times and everything, had him sitting there saying, teams are not, I don't know, the computer said that teams weren't going to go for running backs. Now, I put him in because it's plausible enough. I think he's going to be going in the 2nd round. But it gives me a chance to talk about the fact that the running back room right now is Alvin Kamara coming off an injury-plagued year with legal issues, and his backup is Mark Ingram again. Okay, and again, for like his 4th tour of duty with the Saints. And that's the thing, when you look at the Saints roster, it's like, oh, they're fine there. And you lose track of how old the guy is at that position. Sort of, have they fallen off to a degree? And it probably won't be Breece Hall. James Cook was also on the on the list there, and that'd be somebody they might be interested in. Might be an interesting compliment to Kamara. A running back there, not to fill a need. We've not solved any wide receiver problems, but just to plug a potential future hole.
Right. I think that's the best way to frame it. I mean, honestly, it might end up being for this year, just depending on how the Kamara stuff shakes out. And then, like you said, like Ingram, truthfully, I think Ingram was good for what he is at this point. You know what I mean? Like, I think last year he can be like a pretty solid number 2, but with running backs, like when they hit the wall, they hit the wall. And it could be this year with Ingram just because he's as old and has as much run as he does. So I think if they targeted a running back, especially someone with, kind of the bulk that Hall has, again, he specifically is probably not going to be here, but if they targeted a guy who could, kind of fill in more for what Ingram does, I think it would make a ton of sense.
Right. You don't want to be in a position where Kamara is, again, limited or unavailable. and then Ingram is your bell cow at
Right.
this point. Right. So
Right. That was a 7 years ago type of thing.
Right. A couple other questions and thoughts about the Saints. And I'll backtrack because there was some about other teams. Patrick Sealy put a proposal out there that I was actually fiddling with when I was doing mock drafts. Jameson Williams before the Eagles and Chargers to replace Thomas, and then the best offensive lineman. Well, here's problem one: the Eagles are still ahead of the Saints.
Right.
Eagles gave them 16, not 15. So the Eagles want Jameis Winston. They're going to take Jameis Winston. Okay, that's your first problem. So then they're not taking one. Maybe they take Olave or somebody like that. That would be pretty darn solid. Best offensive lineman after the Chargers draft is probably not going to be Evan Neal. It's not going to be Charles Cross. It's not going to be Ike Ekwonu. It might not be Trevor Penning at that point. So that's when you look at this, neither scenario makes sense. Like waiting where they're at now, they're going to lose the guys they want. Okay. Although they could take Penning with the first one, then go back and take a receiver. But moving up fills a potential hole.
Right. I think if they're adamant on solving tackle and receiver, the tackle portion of it doesn't seem like it's as plausible because, like you said, they're going to end up picking one of these second or third tier guys like a Tyler Smith, a Bernard Raymond, something like that. I think receiver, they'll probably be fine because even if it's not Jameson Williams, like you mentioned, they could probably still get somebody like Olave, who to me is like still really good and in the first tier receivers in this class. So I think receiver, they could probably figure out. Tackle, I mean, and this is why you traded up for a tackle. If they really want one of the best guys, they're going to have to go up and do it.
Right, absolutely. By the way, preview of next week's walkthrough for me, Tyler Smith has some phenomenal statistics, but did you know he led the nation in holding penalties with 12 holding penalties in 2021?
You know what? I haven't seen him too much myself, but I work with Brandon Thorne over at Bleacher Report. He obviously does all the offensive line stuff for us. Everything I've heard about Tyler Smith, that penalty thing checks out.
Yeah, when you watch the film, I mean, he's unbelievably nimble. He gets to the outside, and then he gives a nice big hug. I mean, not always. I mean, sometimes he mauls the guy, and it's very impressive. I think he's a good prospect. He's only 21 years old, like literally, like he turned 21, like I think Saturday or something like that. So he's a very young prospect. He can grow out of it. But if you took Tyler Smith and put him on the edge of the Saints line and said, "You're our left tackle right now," you had a hard time not holding against AAC guys. Here's the Buccaneers pass rushers. It could be a little ugly.
Yeah, I think going from what he faced with some of those technical issues to go block Brian Burns. I don't know about that.
Yeah, right. It's just going to be grab,
Yep.
on the edge. Thordy and Hammer asked, can the Saints just start doing MLB style buyouts where they pay Taysom Hill $1 million a year for 40 years? Don't give Mickey Loomis any ideas.
Look, if that's what it takes to get him off the roster, I mean, I'm here for it. Whatever kind of weird tricks we can come up with to get him off the roster.
And Joey Stuck says the Saints just need to start handing out contracts in the style of the lease of the Guinness storehouse in Dublin, which I had the pleasure of visiting many years ago. It's a 9,000-year lease. So, yeah, the Guinness storehouse
with that.
Guinness has a downtown Dublin, which nowadays you would never have like processing or anything like that at it. It's still there because they signed a 9,000-year lease in the year 1817 or whatever. That's Taysom Hill's future.
It's looking like it.
the actual answer is, the Saints are doing what they're doing. They are at the limit of what's allowed by the collective bargaining agreement on these contracts. And that's kind of what they're doing. I mean, they're just extending these things out to 2024, 2025. If you think that makes sense, then you're Mickey Loomis or you're somebody from a Saints blog. The fact is they put together a good team this year. And I think a couple of guys were pointing out they could be a wild card team this year because they play in the NFC South.
Absolutely. I mean, like, I get why they think they can compete right now. I mean, you brought up their problems that they're going to have the next couple of years, but I think right now, really outside of Tampa Bay, like, it's an extremely winnable division. Like, the Panthers are probably not going to be very good. The Falcons are horrendous. And then even truthfully, like, the NFC at large, not that great. Like, they could probably pretty reasonably get into a wild card spot.
Right. And that's it. You get into your wild card spot. And then next year you have to run it back with the same guys. a year older and a year worse. I want to backtrack to a question that is not about the Saints, but about the Jets. If Thibodeaux isn't there at 4, this is from DJ RM3, and I think he's talking about my mock draft, which dropped on Monday. If Thibodeaux isn't there at 4, what do you think about the Jets taking Wilson at 4 and Karlaftis at 10? I don't hate
Garrett Wilson?
Yes. You think that's too high, don't you?
Oh, I don't like that at all. I don't like that at all.
Okay.
And Wilson's like a fine player. I just think, one, if you're going to be a receiver prospect picked in the top 10, you should be a very clear number one. We don't even have to think about how to use you. Anything. That's why I thought, Chase, Waddle, and Smith were just like no-brainer. These guys can produce.
Mm-hmm.
Wilson, I think it's going to be a little bit trickier, and I think it's going to take him some time to get adjusted to the NFL, so I don't love him at 4. However, Karlaftis at 10, okay. I'm on board. I think he's a top 10 prospect to me. I think he could be something like a Ryan Kerrigan, where he's just a very good power, technical type of rusher with not the best bend, but like enough to complement all of the other things that he does. So I'm really high on Karlaftis. If they got him at 10, I think that would be awesome.
Okay, so we got our positive Purdue statements in, which we have to do here every Tuesday. Well, who would you put it for the Jets then, if not Wilson?
In that scenario, it seems like, Neal could be there. I think, even if they want to kick him to right tackle, I think that would be really good for a guy like Zach Wilson, who I think really needs help with the offensive line. If they wanted to do that, either of the corners would probably be fine. They really need cornerback help. So if they take Stingley or Sauce, that would be better than Wilson to me. I think that's probably the direction I'd be looking at.
Yeah, and I like Wilson better than you, but I would take the chance that he comes back around at 10 if I'm the Jets.
Yeah, I 10 I think is still a little too high for me, but it's like in the range where it's like, you know what, I get it, especially because that's like right before a bunch of receivers are going to rattle off the board. Whereas like to me, the 4 to 10 range is where a lot of the either remaining tackles or best defenders are going to go. So it feels more to me like that's the range that the Jets should be striking for those positions.
You're either going to get a starting left tackle for the next 10, 12 years, or possibly a shutdown corner.
Right.
And in the scenario, Thibodeau's already gone in the scenario, or you're getting Thibodeaux.
Exactly.
But we're going to wrap up in a second. Thornton Hammer pointed out, ESPN tried to figure out Becton's current weight, and his nutritionist would only commit to below 400. This is sort of a developing story. Those of us who love Becton coming out, there's all this whispers about, how dedicated he has been. And while I hate stuff like that, there's a lot of them. And that's why there's a lot of talk about the Jets taking a tackle, putting themselves in a position where they could move on from Becton or move Becton elsewhere, etc.
Exactly. And the one weird thing I would say about him is like, you probably still want him at like 380. Like that's just the way that he's built, I don't necessarily think his weight is like a does he care type of thing. He literally is just built to where he has to have that kind of weight on him.
Right.
Evan Neal, I thought was kind of like that. I was surprised he got down to what he got to, truthfully. And honestly, I don't think he's going to play at that. He'll probably bulk back up a little bit.
Yeah, Neal has somebody who's had weight issues over the course of his career in the past as well. And a lot of those guys do. You wear it because Becton's also had foot.
Right. That's probably the bigger thing to me.
Right. And then that's a cycle because, I can't work out like the way I want to from a cardio standpoint because of a foot injury. And then I get heavier and that exacerbates my foot injury.
Exactly.
This is a good time for us to wrap up. And I want to remind everyone before we wrap up that everything we do here, draft related at Football Outsiders, is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. And you can use the promo code FO40, that's FO40, at Underdog to double your deposit up to $100. Links to Underdog Fantasy can be found in the description of this video below. Come play with us at Underdog today. You can play football, fantasy football, baseball, NBA, over-unders, things like that. There's a lot of stuff you can do there. Derrik, what's happening in Film Room this week?
I am, for the first time in at least over a month, jumping back to the defensive side of the ball. I figured before we hit the draft, I had to get to my favorite player in the entire class, which is Houston's Logan Hall. 3-tech, kind of 4-eye, 5-tech kind of guy. But I just think he's the meanest guy in the entire class. So nice. I'm excited to show the people why I love him.
Awesome. So we have Logan Hall coming on Film Room. Check out Football Outsiders. We also have Cubase and Playmaker Score and Backcast. And some of them are still working their way from the ESPN firewall to Football Outsiders, but check back every day. You can get Derrik's work. You can catch those stat-based articles about quarterbacks and receivers. I got a 3-round mock draft up. You can also check that out. And we'll be seeing Derrik soon. And next week, Derrik, there's going to be a top secret, super secret crossover event, a multiverse of madness, and Football Outsiders will be involved in it. So we might not catch you for 2 more weeks. Folks, you can catch me in 2 days with Aaron Schatz and a special guest to be determined, and we'll be discussing non-draft related stuff. Thank you all for watching, listening. Remember, if you are engaging with us, please engage with us by liking, leaving reviews, etc., on whatever podcast or streaming service you use. Thanks for those of you who are with us now. Thanks for those listening later. Take care.